If you ever tried to make an ambient track sound lo-fi, but it just ended up sounding a bit muddy or lifeless, then this video is for you. There's a secret to getting that hazy, dreamy Øneheart vibe, but it's not just about throwing low-pass filters on everything. In fact, the key to getting a good lo-fi mix is actually keeping your highs in, and I'll show you how to do that in today's video. One style of ambient music I've been vibing with a lot recently is what some people call liminal ambient, which is that kind of hazy, lo-fi, hypnotic style that's been popularized by artists like Øneheart. If you've seen track art like this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's so beautiful and simple. It never ceases to amaze me how deep those tracks can get, even if they're just minimal, short, repeating loops. And recently, I've started to receive a lot of mixes in this style, and they all seem to have one thing in common. They're really dark. Almost too dark to the point where they start to sound muffled. Which totally makes sense. After all, it does sound like that on the surface. But if you put a spectrum analyzer on a Øneheart track, you'll see there's actually quite a lot happening in the top end. So what's going on here, and how do we get that kind of sound without just throwing a low pass filter on every one of our layers and calling it a day? Well, here's my take. The secret isn't in dulling the individual layers, it's in the mix bus. Specifically, it's using a style of mixing called top-down mixing. If you're not familiar, top-down mixing basically means shaping the mix at the mix bus level first before you go down into the individual layers to do any processing. And in this case, it will make all the difference. So here's the slightly controversial part. I think that you should keep the top end in all of your original recordings before you mix your lo-fi ambient. It might sound weird at first, but once you start shaping the mix as a whole, it's all going to click. I'll show you exactly how to do it in this video. Okay, so here I have one of my older tracks called Chromium, which is kind of in the style of like a Øneheart kind of lo-fi ambient. Here's the original before I started mixing it. It's got a lot of Ableton's erosion and redux and stuff on it to give it a bit of a kind of chiptune-y vibe. So to make it a bit more lo-fi, we're going to have to roll off some of the highs, right? So here is what I call the bottom-up mixing version, where we slap a low-pass filter on all of the tracks. Here's my top-down version. Right, so immediately, hopefully you notice that there's more headroom, there's more top end, there's more air to the top-down version. And there's still a little bit of work to do to get all of that kind of crispiness coming off the very top end. But I feel like it definitely feels a lot roomier, and there's a lot more space to move in the top-down version. So what's the major difference? Well, let's have a look just very quickly at what we did in the bottom-down version. Here I've thrown my favorite TDR Nova, and I've done my kind of classic rookie move of just adding a low-pass filter here. It's at 24 dB per octave, and I've just pulled it back until this individual. Right. Until we lose that kind of crispiness. And I've done that with all of the individual tracks. Right, so we've cut off that crispiness, but because we've done this, if you look at this track again, we've lost quite a lot of the top end, and it's so harshly cut off that there's basically nothing on the top end there. And this particular frequency range, if we have a look at the full spectrum for this track, this particular frequency range here between about 2 and 6, 7K, this is the area that our ears are most tuned into. So the more we chop away at this area, the less kind of clarity we're going to feel. And the more it's just going to feel a bit kind of mushy, right? So my top-down approach has two aspects to it. The first one is that instead of adding a low-pass filter to each of the individual tracks to make them all individually sound lo-fi, I've simply added one low-pass filter to the entire track. So that's part one. I've added, here's my low-pass here. But as you can see, my low-pass only goes down to about 10K or so. So in addition to my low-pass filter, I've added another shelf filter here, which doesn't cut everything off. All right, so if we turn this off, you can hear there's that crispiness again. So it's taken away most of it, right? It's done most of the work without compromising all this top end. And then I've chucked that low-pass filter on the end just to take that last little bit of crispiness off the top. Right, so it's a 1-2 punch. We add the shelf filter on the top here until it feels like it's gotten rid of most of the stuff, but it hasn't taken away too much. Then we chuck that little low-pass filter just on the end to take off that little bit on the top. Now, the second thing I've done here is I've actually exaggerated the frequencies just before where my shelf filter is. So let's listen to it with this off. All right, turn it back on. One of the things I learned when I was messing around with more kind of analog style filters is that often when they cut the top end, they will also do a little boost to the area just before this area that gets cut off. And this adds a little bit more kind of clarity and starts to bring back some of the area up here. Right, this kind of crosses over with my shelf filter here and with my low pass filter. So we're kind of adding back some of the frequencies that have been cut off while still allowing the frequencies at the very top to stay gone. And I've done a similar thing on my individual tracks. So you can see I've got my shelf here, low pass filter on the top, and then that little boost there. Just to add back a little bit of extra stuff. So same here, if I turn all this off. Pretty crunchy. And then we put them all on together. And if you make a tight enough shelf filter, you can actually, it will actually give its own little boost. So we can augment that a little bit ourselves to give it a little bit more. Right, so that way we're keeping a little bit more of that top end. We're giving ourselves a little bit more air, a little bit more room to move, and we're not ending up with a muddy, kind of flat sounding mix, a more 3D lo-fi. So I hope that made sense to you. If you do end up using this technique in your music, please do share it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Please don't forget to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing if you haven't done already. And you might be interested to know that top-down mixing is actually something that I learned from taking a rock mixing course. I learned a bunch more things from rock that I've adapted to ambient music, and you can learn all about them in this video. Until next time, keep making music. Cheers.